You know, my team was going to win the Super Bowl this year if we just didn't have those couple of things go against us. That's what everyone says, right? That's what the common saying is of, oh, we got unlucky. We were a good team, but, a couple fluky things went against us. That's what happened. Well, let's talk about luck in football because it's a very real thing, of course. I mean, fluky plays do happen. It's a sport with an oblong-shaped ball. So how do we determine which teams were actually unlucky last year and are better than maybe we realized and which teams weren't unlucky last year, or maybe, which teams were maybe not quite as good as their record might indicate. I think this is very interesting. And one of the big things you can do is look at point differential, or in fact, my favorite way to look at point differential is net points per drive. So basically, the way to view it is it also takes drives into account because certain teams get more drives than other teams. So I think that's a better way to view it. However, another real clear indicator is simply just turnover luck. Turnover luck is a very real thing, and it's always hard to evaluate, right, when it comes to turnover luck, because to some degree, turnovers are I wouldn't necessarily just call them fluky. Like, you do have to do something good, but it seems like it's far more consistent for an offense that throws a lot of turnovers to continue to do so than a defense that generates a lot of turnovers to continue to generate turnovers. Year in and year out, it historically, just the math of it, it does go down to some degree. Not 100%, but to some degree. So this is going to be a little unfair, but I'm basically going to play this out as if turnovers didn't happen. Using the expected points a turnover typically generates, I'm factoring that in, and also looking at every team's net points per drive. And I think, listen, it might not be perfect, but I guarantee you this, it's better than just looking at win-loss records to determine who the better teams were last year. And I actually think once doing it kind of makes some sense. So let's get into that and let's just talk about it. So here we go with the first 8 on this list using the algorithm. This is, basically the way to view it. If turnovers didn't happen, if you had one drive and then your opponent had one drive, who had the most amount of points? The Buffalo Bills are number 1 with New England just behind. I think New England was good last year. I really do. I think that they're a good football team. I think people, are kind of paying a bit too much attention to their embarrassing loss. But again, their embarrassing loss was to the team that on this list, many people felt like the Bills were the best team in football. They just, the 13 seconds thing happened. Patrick Mahomes went off against you. It's kind of, sometimes that happens. Tampa Bay and the Rams were both tied at 0.69, although Tampa Bay was a little bit better once you got to the decimal points. But they were basically the same, which also kind of makes some sense. Hey, these two teams, nearly went to overtime. It came down to the final play, final seconds. So sure, that makes sense. These were two very good teams. And it also makes some sense with, the Rams and Bengals here at 4 and 5. Remember, they were both 4 seeds. So it kind of does check out a little bit of like, oh, well, this makes a little bit more sense. The Rams being a 2 seed and the Bengals being a 3 seed kind of would feel a little bit better and feel more logical in them being able to get to the Super Bowl. What's also interesting, a team like Kansas City, who, again, they're here at number 6. They had a lot of good stuff happen. So they're maybe, again, kind of their record was a little bit tough at certain points, but kind of goes to show, okay, maybe they were really better, and that does kind of check out. And again, to be clear, I'm not sure if I really made this clear, but you might be arguing, well, Mahomes throws a lot of interceptions, so that's going to be why this is the case and why, they should actually not be this high. I'm not factoring in offensive turnovers, only if your defense got turnovers. So that's the way I'm doing this. The Eagles here at number 7. So for the Philadelphia Eagles, hey, a lot of people felt like they were kind of maybe not a great team, maybe didn't deserve to be here. Well, according to this, no, they actually were a pretty good team, and they did deserve to be here. And the reality is, if certain things broke differently, maybe they win more football games, and that's, I think, an interesting conversation. Number 8, the Green Bay Packers. So Packers fans won't love to see this, and maybe you could argue perhaps that the fact that they played more garbage time by being up more kind of meant they put the gas, push the brakes a little bit. I don't know if that's true. I don't think it's true. But again, this is kind of interesting, I think. Next panel, Dallas, takes a bit of a hit, I think, which is fair simply because they did generate a lot of turnovers. Some of that will be continued, but not all of it, of course. But they still are a very good team. San Francisco, again, another team that kind of is higher than maybe if you did a pre-playoff power rankings. I don't think that they go number 10 necessarily, but are actually pretty good. And team like Seattle, this is very optimistic if you're a Seahawks fan. Kind of makes some sense. Oh, hey, maybe they just were kind of unlucky last year because we all thought they would be better. So that could check out. And then also like, teams like Arizona and Tennessee, who a lot of us were maybe higher on than we perhaps should have been had we saw on this list, because they would both go one and done in the postseason. Teams like Denver, the Chargers, and Baltimore, also teams that are above average playoff contenders last year, who none of them made it to the postseason, but again, interesting there. This next panel here, so Indianapolis at 17, maybe makes some sense as to how they could lose to a team like the Jaguars week 17, is because maybe they weren't as good as we realized, perhaps. New Orleans, though, like still a solid team that's, again, had such a weird year with them. And then you get to the other side, the teams that are in the negatives in terms of net points. You have Cleveland and you have Minnesota, who, again, certain things change differently. They could have done a lot better, but in terms of the luck, kind of right around where they ended up. The Raiders and the Steelers here at 21 and 22 also kind of does make some sense. Although I would say with the Raiders, like they weren't one team this year. They were like 3 different teams. So kind of evaluating them in terms of like, well, this is why they lost round 1. I don't know if that's fair to say. The Steelers weren't good. We all knew this. They made the playoffs, but not very good. Carolina and Miami here. So, hey, those two teams maybe a little bit better, or Miami about where we expected, maybe even a little bit lower, but Carolina a little bit higher than you would expect. That's kind of nice. I would also say Miami, again, it's maybe not entirely fair to pretend that they, got the average amount of turnovers, because they do generate some more turnovers. So I think it's better to pretend every team got an average amount of turnovers than they got what they actually got. I think that's a fairer way to do it, but it's still not perfectly 100%. And final panel here, no real surprises. These teams all suck. I don't really know what else to say. They all sucked last year, at least. There's maybe some hope. But I guess the one interesting thing is that you have some, a team like Detroit, who was 27th. You have a team like Houston, who ended up being 32nd. A team like Atlanta, 30th, who I think people might have thought would be higher there. The Jets were second worst. So I guess just the actual placement, like the Jaguars, who were the worst team in football record-wise, weren't the worst team in football in terms of actual stuff. So maybe they did get a little bit unlucky on top of not being very good. So that's kind of interesting. So yeah, listen, I want to be clear. This is not an end-all, be-all by any means. But actually, you go back and you do this for other teams. Like, you do this last year, and like, oh, Cleveland was actually overrated last year. Like, if you did that, you would have known that. But I didn't do this last year, so I didn't know that. So it's kind of an interesting exercise just to put in your head, one of the 1,000 things you want to have if you are trying to predict what's going to happen next year in a sport that is unpredictable. I think this is a good way to take a start there and to kind of just look at, okay, well, this stuff is interesting. I think a big part of football is you want to make sure that you evaluate this stuff, and you want to make sure that if you're a GM, you know where you're at. So if you're a Seattle Seahawks GM and you look at this, you could talk yourself into, hey, maybe we're not as bad as people think we are. Or if you're a team like Tennessee, you might think, oh, we can just maintain stuff. We were close. Maybe not the best idea. You might not have actually been that good. Although, again, you have a great coach, so maybe that's part of it as well, is that's why you overperform. That's where things get a little bit tricky, but at least you can have a baseline to start the evaluation process, I suppose. So, yep, that's what I think. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. And, of course, as always, thanks for watching.